Robin Shaw's middle school bullies did him a favor by ridiculing his ability to play football or snowboard. He learned to do both and figured out how not to listen to the doubters. That confidence and determination has been a boon for his career. After stints at a family-run oncology practice, Flatiron, and is co-founder of Oncology, Robin started Thyme Care to offer cancer patients a dedicated care team, data-driven insights, and a value-aligned network. With backing from the bluest of the blue-chip VCs, TimeCare is off to the races. The company looks forward to growing 5 to 10x next year. I'm your host, David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group. If you like what you hear, please press that like button. Well, Robin Shah, co-founder and CEO of TimeCare, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you so much, David, for having me.
Looking forward to hearing about all of what you're working on now, but equally interested in how you got there, and would love to start off and just hear a little bit about your background. What was your upbringing like? Any childhood influences that have stuck with you and influenced you?
Yeah, I would say you had mentioned to me as we were talking earlier that folks want to hear about entrepreneurship and how people think about that. I would tell you, growing up, I didn't even know what that word meant. But there's something in my childhood that I learned that helped me get to where I am today, which is when I was maybe in middle school, I had a bunch of friends that I would call them bullies, who's
Yeah,
who didn't really believe that I could do certain things, which was one, learn how to snowboard,
yeah.
and two, play football. And in seventh grade, I decided to take that challenge on, which is I'll prove you wrong. And I did both and ended up sticking out through both of them, of which all my friends quit all of those things.
Nice.
Um, and I actually became relatively decent at those two sports. And I only draw that back to the comments you made earlier because the big thing that I think has carried over to me in this idea of starting companies is, I don't really accept failure.
Yeah,
I work through it, and it's actually not even a word to me.
yeah.
Failure doesn't exist. Um, it's just
So
a path
you
to
got like two
success.
block you got two blocks in your vocabulary: entrepreneur and failure. So uh,
Right. Exactly.
you learned
Exactly.
entrepreneur
Yeah.
eventually. It
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, and the second thing is learning to you take risks, right? You just
Yeah,
kind of go, you take a risk, and you just believe in yourself. And it worked out early in my childhood, and I sort of carried those things
yeah.
over into practice.
Well, I was saying, a lot of the audience for the Health Biz podcast is early stage healthcare career. We don't have that many middle schoolers, but maybe we should, because I do think that a lot of people, they may get you learned one lesson, which is that you could do it. It doesn't matter if somebody told you you couldn't. There's a lot of people that learn the other lesson, which is that if people say you can't do it, you can't do it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, that is true, and um, I think it's another topic of conversation, but just the ways to really deflect and manifest what you learn in that childhood, to not take those things negatively, and to take them as challenges and opportunities. And I learned that from my father.
Yeah.
My father is one that the word no doesn't register in his brain, and so the word no doesn't register in my brain. Um, and taking risk is just the way that we grew up, and so I feel fortunate that I had a household that nurtured that thinking. But yeah, I think that is something that would be great to try to really develop in children early on and over time. And I have a child now. I have an 18-month-old, and so I think about these things every
Yeah.
day as I think about his growth and development as a small human being. So
Sounds good. Well, I'll have to tell you, some of the little kids, they like the word no once they learn it, so be careful of that one. So we'll try to keep that out of the household.
it is a constant conversation with my wife on
Yeah,
co-parenting.
nice, nice. So, okay, so then tell me a little bit about school and your sort of early education. You mentioned your dad, and I think you got started, at least at one point, it seems like, in the family business.
That is true. So I grew up in a small town, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The population was limited, and um, I did high school there, and then I ended up actually going to a private college, George Washington University. None of my friends went there. I was new. Most people where I grew up either went to Penn State or West Virginia.
Yeah,
As you can imagine, those schools are very different than George Washington University.
indeed.
Um, and and while I was, so the story is actually while I was at George Washington University, my father came to me and asked me to help him in a family business, and that's really how I got into oncology professionally. And while I was working with him throughout the end of my undergraduate degree, I decided to go to grad school while also working with him, and ended up getting my master's in business administration at Johns Hopkins. And then after that process, after I graduated, I ended up transitioning away from my father's oncology practice to go off to a new venture.
Yeah, nice. So there was so I saw on your LinkedIn profile, I think Flatiron. So you went from like the most, you know, grinding, challenging, unsexy part of the oncology world to one of the sexier areas, at least from the at least from the venture capital side and so on. What was that like, Flatiron?
That is very true. I would say the day-to-day grind of working in a healthcare practice
Yeah,
to kombucha and coffee on keg in a Google Ventures backed startup.
yeah,
Very different experience and lifestyle. So I ended up moving to Manhattan for that position. I was still relatively young, and it was great. I think it was, although it was a different experience, it was an immersion into a group of people that were very like-minded, which is we're gonna work hard and play hard, but we're gonna do it together.
yeah.
I don't know if I tell many people this, but throughout that journey, I was at Flatiron for 5 years. I think when I look back on it, I averaged having dinner with a Flatiron colleague 5 nights a week,
Nice.
weekends included. And so, what I learned from that experience was that when you're looking to build a company that quickly, scale that fast, with goals that lofty, you really got to trust each other. And we became not only really close friends, but all together collectively accelerated the vision that we had at Flatiron. And as you know, that company did exit in 2018
Yeah,
with a relatively favorable exit.
nice. And then from there you're on to, I think, One Oncology.
Yeah. That really was an evolution. While I was at Flatiron Health, a lot of what I spent my time on was incubating new concepts and opportunities that I thought could disrupt the space. And through that process, one of those ideas was how to take what I learned with my father, but to do it at scale and to do it with the biggest practices in the country. And so I partnered while at Flatiron with a number of the most brilliant oncologists in the country to help launch this company, One Oncology, which is an oncology practice management company. We based the company in Nashville. I moved here. I met my wife the week I moved here.
Nice. So it was worth
And
it. No matter where the business story goes from here, it was already the right decision. It sounds like.
Great wife, great kid, great dog, great house. So
Nice.
all of the above worked out for me.
So, one of the things that happens when you're in the healthcare business, as I am, and you were even more kind of an oncologist, people call you. You're not a doctor, I'm not a doctor, but people get in a situation, and, it's one thing at the abstract level to know the healthcare system is hard to navigate, and it's expensive, and this, that, and the other. But I read, I think you had written about somebody whose mom, maybe, if you'll tell me if I got this story right, had pancreatic cancer, and they, called up and, yeah, sure, we can see you in a month. And
Yeah.
it seemed to be kind of the part of this kind of the start of Thyme Care. And so just talk about that experience and kind of where you went with it.
Yeah, so I actually love this story because it really was the first the snowflake and the snowball of TimeCare. So being in the space for so long, I get these calls routinely from people all across the country saying, "Hey, Robin, my family member, my friend, my colleague has been diagnosed with cancer. We don't know what to do. Can you help us?" And I immediately sort of dive in and just start
Yeah,
triage. So call my friends and colleagues across the country to get people in to see an oncologist to make sure that in this really vulnerable time, someone feels like they're supported, because that's really what they're looking for. Someone is helping me answer the questions of what's going on with me. So this happened with a close childhood friend's mother. We were really close friends in high school. Still friends now, just lost touch because we're in different parts of the world. See him, every year at our fantasy football draft. But he called me about his mother, and she had gotten really bad results from a physician in Hershey, Pennsylvania, that indicated that there was pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't confirmed yet, and what she told me was that the next appointment available for her to be seen to check in with a physician and get the appropriate testing was 4 weeks from that date.
Yeah.
And um, that's just not how the system works
Yeah.
if you know somebody. And so if she would have gone through that process, she would have waited 4 weeks to see somebody. They would have done some testing. They would have waited 2 weeks to get the confirmed diagnosis. They would have confirmed the diagnosis. They would have probably waited 2 weeks to start treatment. Found out later she had late stage pancreatic cancer, which is a relatively aggressive type of cancer. But what happened when she called me was I actually called my father, who's
Yeah.
not too far away, and I told him the story. And knowing exactly what's going on, he actually ordered all the tests remotely
Yeah.
before he saw her. He ordered all the tests. He sent her on to get a PET scan. She got it the next morning.
Yeah.
So 24 hours later, he saw her 48 hours later, and the Monday subsequently after she started treatment. So you're talking about an 8-week difference
Yeah.
in starting treatment, and you just don't know with these disease what impact that might have had. Now she's doing great today.
Good.
She's survived through the disease. She's doing well, and she felt supported through that process. Her and her family, and so that was the genesis. When that
Yeah.
happened, I immediately called a former colleague of mine at Flatiron Health. His name is Brenton Fargnoli. He actually now runs the healthcare fund at AliCorp. And I told him about the story passionately. I said, we have to solve for this. And so I flew to New York. It was November 2019. And we sat in a WeWork and we started whiteboarding and talking about this problem. And a week later, he sent me a pitch deck. He said, this is a great idea. Now he's an investor.
Right.
I'm like full-time immersed into
Yeah.
oncology and the startup that we just launched about a year earlier. So I don't have time to think about it, but he sent me this great pitch deck. And I started talking to folks about it and ended up actually going to another former colleague from Flatiron who's actually the founder of a health insurance plan. And this would have been in early March of 2020. And I said, here's this idea, and I really love it. It was actually the Friday before the country shut down due to COVID. And I wasn't supposed to go, and I almost canceled that
Yeah.
meeting, but I decided to get in the plane, go to New York, meet him, and come back. And shortly after that, we just sort of started to go through this process of recognizing the opportunity and launching TimeCare.
Nice.
So that was the story in Genesis. And I always go back to um, uh, going through the idea of startups and entrepreneurship is a lot of the idea and the persistence, but there's a lot of luck. That was
Yeah.
very lucky that sort of the timing of those things happened, and I decided to make the trip. So I will say, like, if you're talking to people that want to get into it, is like really persistence and taking all those means, but there's a little luck into all of
Yeah.
these, all of the genesis of these ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously been in oncology for a long time, a lot of experience starting from the family side, being with Flatiron, one of the real movers and shakers, and then in a startup. So you were positioned, I think, to recognize an opportunity when you saw it. So that's part of it. Timing was good, I guess, that you didn't try to go to New York a week later, whatever. And just the persistence as well. And some things that sometimes happens with people is if they don't recognize that there's sort of some luck and good timing involved, they'll end up getting a little bit overconfident and think all the people when they're successful tell them how great you are, and they start to believe that, and that's when they're in trouble. So it sounds like you still understand. There's
We
some
still
luck
have
involved.
a lot of work to do. There was a lot of luck to that process. We're now seeing the fruits of all that hard work and some of that luck as well.
So I had a look at the offering, which made a lot of sense to me, with a dedicated care team and the data-driven insights and the high-value aligned network. Say a little bit more about, what you're offering and how that's maybe different from what's already out in the market.
Yeah. So right now, when you think about any person navigating through a chronic condition like cancer, there's so many touch points within the healthcare system, as well as trying to navigate the psychosocial aspect of your healthcare journey. And most of the solutions that are out there for healthcare today is just focused on solving problems for just the insurance company or just the doctor. But more recently, there's been a wave of organizations focused on going back to the core person receiving the service, which is the patient. And so, as I started this concept around this problem that came to me because of my domain expertise, I started to learn more about the industry and realizing that in other diseases, there are 3, 5, 10 companies trying to solve a problem. So if I look at the chronic kidney disease space, there are 8 companies that are approaching the problem of supporting people through that journey. Um, and so when we think about TimeCare, we think, wow, like we created this opportunity that is focused on the patient or the member, but there's models out there that have done this. And so we're now sort of trying to emulate that model of, okay, patient at the center, but drive value to the health plan, drive value to the provider. And ultimately, if you can do that, everybody wins in that scenario. And so for TimeCare, right, we partner with health insurance companies and risk-bearing entities because they're the ones who manage the population of people. And we understand oncology so well that we now support all of their population for members that have a suspected or confirmed diagnosis. Again, as you mentioned, we use deep insights and analytics to identify people throughout that journey and then identify which interventions that we should be supporting them through that process and assign them people that truly understand what they're going through.
So you mentioned that it was, an investor that had developed a pitch deck and sent it to you. So I always like to ask about, how's the company funded and maybe what you learned from prior ventures, starting with the family business and then some other organizations that have had, varying approaches to funding. How did you think about funding and what's the approach that you're taking?
When I think about funding, I really think about putting the right people around a team to accelerate your mission. And so at TimeCare, we're funded by our lead investors are Andreessen Horowitz, Frist Cressy Ventures, which is led by Senator Frist, as well as Alley Corp, which is led by Dr. Brenton Forgnoli, a former colleague of mine from Flatiron Health. In addition, we have 2 other venture firms, Kasdan Capital and Bessemer Ventures. And on the board of directors, our lead investors all play a role there. If I look at the room of people that are on the board as well as the lead investors, all of those people are people that I've worked with before and I have a good relationship with and understand our mission and our vision. And so when I think about investors and the role they play, it's really about people that are aligned with the mission that you guys have and putting them around you to make you better. And we've been able to do that at TimeCare. The relationship that we have with our board, with our investors, could not be better. We support each other. They answer the call whenever I ask. Some of them just called me just now while we were talking because they
Nice.
just wanted to catch up.
They want to get in on the
And
podcast. Tell them to get in line,
yeah, Senator
You'd have
Frist
to
team
wait
just called me.
Senator Frist needs to wait 4 weeks to get on the podcast, and we're not changing that, so.
Yeah, and he actually, as you know, is so involved in the Nashville community, but he understands every organization he gets involved in, and has been one of the best mentors and coaches to me over the last 2 to 3 years.
That's great. So you got a real, bunch of household names there. I was going to tease you a little bit by saying it's just you just got like a local funder if it's just Frisk that's there. But there's some other names there people may recognize, even a Boston name.
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
forbid. So, so that's great. Now, what kind of traction have you achieved? So clearly, this is a new business. It's as old as the pandemic, and got a bunch of funders, a mission. You got a lot of experience, a team in place, presumably. But what sort of milestones do you look at? What are you achieving, and where are you going from here?
Yeah, so I love to talk about team first, and then talk about sort of patients and then partners. So our company as you know, started at the beginning of the pandemic, but truly took off in late 2020. We're now close to 75 people, and honestly, some of the smartest people I've worked with in my life. And it's just been so great to see the culture and the experience and the team of folks that we put together. Again, going back to something that I learned from Flatiron, is we pulled people from a wide breadth of experience, added them to a set of clinical people that truly understand oncology, put them against this problem together, and now every day we're learning new things that are advancing the business. In addition, we have 50 open roles, I believe, and although the macro environment, a lot of companies are doing the opposite of freezing
Yeah,
hiring and or cutting back. Bobby and I, my co-founder, have made the decision that we don't want to do that. We
yeah,
think that there's too much opportunity in this space to slow down, and so we are continuing to hire and build and grow. We're being thoughtful about all of that,
yeah.
but we are not slowing down. That sort of then goes into the number of lives that we're managing and the people that we're helping. When we started this company, we felt, look, if you help one person, we feel accomplished. We're now actively managing roughly 500 cancer patients.
Hmm.
Um, that comes from a population of about 70,000 people. So the population is 70,000, and of that, 500 or so actively treated cancer patients we are managing. We anticipate that to significantly grow into 2023 to the tune of somewhere around 5 to 10x. And so that's the reason why we're not slowing down our team growth and hiring. And then from a partnership perspective, what we anticipate adding a number of new partners, both local and national, and we're getting great momentum across the country,
Hmm.
which is just validating that this is a problem that others are seeing, and that they want a solution to solve for.
Nice. So I'm curious about your take on the labor market and hiring as it relates to what you're doing. You mentioned 50 or so open positions, if I heard that right, and you're continuing to hire. What I have heard from people is that although on the one hand there's layoffs going on and people slowing down, even if they're doing okay, they're just worried, hey, it's going to be hard to raise the next round, so let me cut the budget now. But I'm also hearing at the same time it's hard to hire people. Even with an attractive opportunity, good salary. I don't know what you're seeing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. Your experience may be different, but what how are you seeing things right now for those people that you're trying to hire?
Yeah, let me answer both questions. So, from a fundraising perspective, the macro environment definitely has an impact on that. Going back to what I said earlier, when you have good partners that you deeply trust, they deeply trust you, you don't have to worry about those things. And so our team feels very fortunate to have Andreessen Horowitz, Frisk, Cressy, Alicorp, Bessemer, Kasdan. These are all A plus venture partners, venture funds. They support companies like ours throughout these evolving markets, and they know that good companies aren't impacted by this. So from a funding perspective, we feel very secure.
Yeah.
We have a very strong runway, and we have a team of people that will back us as long as we need. The second bucket relative to the recruiting, uh, this is sort of a piece of information that I learned from Nat Turner and Zach Weinberg when I was at Flatiron Health, and sort of carried through all of my experiences. Is investing in your people team is one of the most critical things early on in the stage of a company. And I truly believe this, that we have the best head of people and the best recruiter in the country that understand healthcare tech. And so the culture that we're building at TimeCare, the experience that people go through in onboarding and recruiting only gets reverberated through the market when they hear about us. And so when I look at the data, I believe over 80% of people that we offer a position to accept. And I believe we're screening anywhere from 50 to 100 candidates per role we put out there. And we have a very rigorous process to make sure that we find people not only that are well experienced for the role, but are the right culture fit for our organization. Again, when you're a mission oriented company, you find people that are aligned to that mission And if you put those people around the room together, you can actually solve things a lot more efficiently and a lot more successfully. So we are not seeing that same issue,
Yeah.
but we feel fortunate because of what we built, not only with our core team, but also with our investors.
Sounds good. So I'm looking forward to checking in again in 2023 to see that 5 to 10 X. And I don't know where you go for the 5 to 10 X from Senator Frist calling you. I don't want to speculate on who would be calling you to match up with the 5 to 10 X there on that side.
Yeah, if you listen to my podcast with him from
Yeah.
I think 2 months ago, I think I said the same thing there, and he also said I'll check in with you in 2023 in my second podcast interview with you. So.
Nice. All right. Well, listen, it'll be on the circuit. So let me shift away from the professional back to the personal again, where we started, and ask you about if you have time for reading any books, anything that you might recommend to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, one book that I recently read is a book by Ben Horowitz, one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz. It's called The Hard Things About the Hard Things, and my co-founder Dr. Bobby Green actually is the one who sent me the book and said you should read this. And one of the things that I like about the book is it talks about their journey as partners in starting numerous successful companies.
Yeah.
One of the things that's unique about TimeCare that's relatable to the story of Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen is that a lot of our friends have joined us, and so 15 people from Flatiron Health came with us to TimeCare. These are people that we became really close with while we were at Flatiron, and built working and building companies with friends. Has its positives, which is you can move so much faster, but has potential challenges, which is these are your friends and you have two relationships with them. And there's a lot of guidance within that book that helps us think through that.
That book is the most common one mentioned by CEOs on my podcast, although I haven't heard it mentioned recently. I did read it a year or so ago after 2 or 3 people had mentioned it, and I can understand why it has that title, first of all, and then also why it's good guidance. I won't say it's dated, but it does show its age in a couple places. So I think it's a great book to read, and I recommend it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I also like to read a couple books just on the cancer space in general. So there are a lot of good books. Atul Gawande has come out with a number of good ones.
Yeah.
But that's super niche to if you care about cancer.
Another Boston type guy though, so we'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Robin Shah, co-founder and CEO of TimeCare, thank you for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you so much, David, and I look forward to our 2023 edition.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.